So I would like to introduce my third speaker now. It's Miss Priscillia Shen. Priscilla is a lecturer at the DAS Academy. She is currently pursuing her doctorate in education at the National Institute of Education in Singapore and the Institute of Education in UK, London. Her research interests are in dyslexia, Chinese language, and mathematics. So, and her research title is Dyslexia and Chinese Language in Singapore. So here we go, Miss Priscilla Shen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just to share a little bit on the title of my research, this is actually, in fact, my master dissertation, which I've actually done under the London Metropolitan University and with the supervision of Emeritus Professor Angela Fawcett. So what a portion of my dissertation here actually, in fact, has been published in the APJDD, Volume 2, Number 2. Later on, I will share with you the actual title. In the APJDD, I actually included an evaluation of the Chinese program that we have in the DAS. But what I'm going to share here in this presentation is what I have actually done, the full presentation of my research for the master dissertation. So it actually includes a quantitative analysis and also a qualitative analysis of how our children cope with Chinese language in Singapore's context. So I know everyone is very familiar with what dyslexia is, and we know that it's a language-based specific learning difficulty in the areas of reading, writing, and also spelling. And also dyslexic learners have to make extra effort in matching the sounds that they hear in the language and the prints that they see in the language as well. Some of you may have actually attended the session 3, whereby you have all the international speakers sharing their research on dyslexia in their languages. You know that actually dyslexia does vary across different types of languages, and in fact the symptoms of dyslexia varies from language to language, and is highly dependent also on the nature of the language, the structure of the language, and also the cognitive processes an individual has. So in Singapore's context, we take on a bilingual educational policy whereby English is the main language for instruction and also for communication. And our children also learn another language which is related to their ethnicity. So if you're Chinese children, then you learn Chinese. If you're Malay, you learn Malay. And if you're in the Indian ethnic group, then you learn Tamil. So our children actually have to cope with two different types of languages. Some of them can be two different sets of orthographic system, two different types of mapping system. If you compare English and Chinese, Chinese is actually more opaque than English. At least English, you are able to match the letter and the sound, but in Chinese, you can't even break it into like single strokes to try to make sense of what it's tell you. So because in Singapore, we don't really have a real understanding of how our children really cope with Chinese, and furthermore, they're actually coping with two languages. So how does it really affect their difficulties? So what actually in the main literature says, okay, thus far for research in Chinese, especially in the areas of dyslexia, they have some major achievements trying to understand the different subtypes, the underlying cognitive abilities, the possible kind of deficits, the kind of assessment, the kind of intervention for Chinese. And of course, research has also shown that some cognitive deficits found in Chinese learners with dyslexia, they, besides just phonological processing difficulties, they also have difficulties with their visual skills. So does that actually translate into their difficulty in learning Chinese? Another research has also found that rapid naming deficits is actually the most dominant subtype of dyslexia, but it doesn't actually exist by itself. It still is also accompanied with visual processing, visual memory deficits, with visual orthographic processing deficits as well. So normally we look at the different subtypes of dyslexia. In fact, you have the phonological subtype, you have the orthographic subtypes, and so on. So phonological subtype is in fact, in Chinese language is perhaps not the most prominent one. Perhaps it's just, how the Chinese characters are being structured. So, in fact, so the subtype of dyslexia can be more visual type, which is more related to the orthographic structure of how Chinese characters are written. So what has driven me in this research is that I want to know how dyslexia has affected our children in learning Chinese, coping with Chinese, and also whether visual perception ability does affect the learning of Chinese. Some of you may have been working with children, some children with dyslexia, and you'll notice that some children with dyslexia may find Chinese okay to cope with, but not in English, and the other way around. So, as I've mentioned, as dyslexia varies across languages, we really want to know whether, as what in other literature has mentioned, that visual skills does play an important role in learning Chinese or not. So it means that if you have dyslexia, but if your visual processor skills are very strong, does that mean that you actually may not have as much difficulty coping with Chinese or not? Yeah, and bearing in mind also in the existing literature, most of them are actually done in countries whereby Chinese is a dominant language. But in Singapore, Chinese is not the dominant language, but English is. So do we differ as much as the other, perhaps the monolinguals or the other countries, especially the established ones in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China? So in this in this study, we took on two types of analysis, primarily the quantitative analysis to do actual comparison between our two children's Chinese literacy skills, and also the qualitative type of analysis to actually find out how our children really do perceive and what are their underlying thought processes for learning and reading and even writing of Chinese characters. So in the qualitative analysis, I actually take on the grounded theory method to generate an understanding, a theory of the social phenomena of our children, how they actually view Chinese characters. So because in this test, in this study that we were doing, there was no real existing assessment tool that we could use. Because if we were to take assessment from Hong Kong or China or in Taiwan, the difference in scripts, you have the traditional versus the simplified script that we have in Singapore. You have the different types of phonetic sounds. So we need to do some adaptation. We need to make some references, of course, with the established tools to come up with our own set of assessment. Bearing in mind that our students' vocabulary in terms of learning Chinese as their mother tongue in school is not as wide as the monolinguals in other countries. So I think even for any one of us, as normal as we can be, if we try to use their assessment, we may come up with some dyslexic symptoms as well. Right? Okay, so so we did do some adaptations, and of course we also made reference to our MOE syllabus. Back then it was only the 2007 Chinese syllabus. So there are 3 subtests in this battery of Chinese literacy tests. So the first one was actually a test of assessing the children's orthographic and structural awareness of how Chinese characters are written, the stroke patterns, the radical positions, the phonetic and also the semantic components of characters. Then the second subtest is actually reading and recognition of single Chinese characters. At the same time, we did further analysis in terms of their reading error miscues, trying to understand whether the errors are more related to the visual aspects or the phonetic aspects, or is it the semantic aspects. And thirdly, in this subtest, we will test the students' spelling, writing, copying of Chinese characters. So near distance, far distance copying, and also the writing of the Chinese characters. So in this, the third subtest, we also try to analyze their errors. What kind of error do they make? So we will analyze whether, because of how Chinese characters are being written, actually it's quite easy to invent new ones. Especially you kind of have some rough idea, the kind of rules to be put into the principles that put into in writing Chinese characters. So we try to analyze in terms of visual, phonetic, semantic aspects, as well as whether the Chinese characters are invented or not. So in the first stage, we needed to select students who are suitable for the assessments. So because, our aim is actually to find a comparison between dyslexia group of students and the non-dyslexia group of students, as well as those with high visual skills and the low visual skills. So in round one, we actually went to approach mainstream schools to ask for students. We actually made use of our DAS students as well to do the comparison. So in total, we actually managed to recruit 95 students from both sides. However, we need to, of course, do some selection. There's certain restrictions, such as students of the same age group, like 10 years old, is the ones that we're looking at. They have to be Singaporeans. They cannot be exempted from Chinese, which actually may affect their the results in the study. Okay, and then we administer the lucid rapid dyslexia screening test to differentiate the dyslexia group and the non-dyslexia group. And we also use the test of visual perceptual skills to select students with very high visual skills and the low visual skills. So out of this whole selection process, we only managed to find a total of 45 students. Right, and in the non-dyslexia group, which is the mainstream school students, we have 26, and dyslexia group we have 19, and of course they are further categorized into dyslexia group, non-dyslexia group, at a high visual group and also low visual group. And after which we will administer the battery, the battery of Chinese literacy test that we have developed, and then after that we started to do a comparison. So what have we found from the quantitative findings is that, in fact, we didn't find any interaction effect, which means that, in fact, if you for dyslexic students with high visual skills, they didn't do as much significantly better than their dyslexic counterparts with low visual skills, and vice versa. So even for the non-dyslexic group. So in a way, it kind of tells us that maybe visual perceptual skills is not important underlying processes for learning Chinese characters. However, we need to also bear in mind that we didn't manage to get a very large number of students. We did find significant, we did not say significant, but we did find differences, but statistically they are not significant enough. So, but we also did a comparison in terms of their Chinese literacy scores between the dyslexia group and non-dyslexia group, and we did find that the dyslexics, of course, our own DAS students did much poorer in terms of their Chinese, and also they also did poorer in terms of their visual perceptual skills as compared to the mainstream counterparts. So the further analysis of the comparison in terms of the differences between the dyslexia group and non-dyslexia groups in different aspects of Chinese literacy skills, we found that our dyslexic students tend to do poorer in several areas, especially in character structural awareness, the orthographic structural, understanding where the radical positions are supposed to be, and also the stroke productions, as well as reading, which is typical of dyslexia. And also in terms of spelling, in most areas, writing, copying, and everything, they are also doing much poorer than the mainstream counterparts. And then we also look at the reading error miscues. We wanted to know what type of errors that our students tend to make more, or how, or is it the same as the non-dyslexia group? And surprisingly, we found that students in the non-dyslexia group, which is the mainstream school students that we did a comparison with our DAS students, is that they tend to make more visually similar errors. So which means that words that share similar looking radicals, they tend to make errors. Like for this word, tu, but if you can see that there has actually another radical that they can read it as a my or my. Or even for ke, they may read it as her, or this one may look is wang, but some students actually they read it as zhu. So in a way, it's like it just kind of tells us that perhaps the mainstream school students tend to know how to, what we call in Chinese, 有边读边 strategy, 没边读中间, means that if you find a familiar part, you try to read what it looks familiar to you. So it kind of tells us that they perhaps have some strategy behind it, but may not be as effective. And then we also further found out that in fact our dyslexic group of students tend to make a lot of unknown errors, which is they make random guesses. They just kind of give you answers, or they kind of misread a lot of Chinese characters as like we can't even categorize wherever it is, whether it's visually or phonetic or semantically related. So perhaps our children with dyslexia, they lack that specific skills in trying to analyze or understand the structure of Chinese characters. So in spelling, we also found that the dyslexia group of students, they tend to invent Chinese characters much more than the mainstream counterparts. And also, they also tend to make more erroneous existing characters, but mainly those that share similar sounds. Like say, 很久, they will write 久, whichever that sounds similar to them. Or they will, maybe like 书包, they will write 本包, like 本, because it's actually related to book as well. So this is what we actually have found out when we try to compare the kind of errors that they commit. So, but of course, we don't want to let go with the fact that, we can't find any effects between visual perceptual skills with the learning of Chinese characters. So we actually run a correlational analysis to see whether there is a significant relationship between visual memory, visual perceptual skills with the processing of Chinese characters. And we did found that visual memory does play a very significant relationship with it. And further analysis tells us that visual memory plays an important role in places whereby they have to recognize Chinese strokes, Chinese stroke patterns, Chinese structures, recognizing the phonetic components and the semantic components, as well as doing discrimination work between different types of Chinese characters, as well as copying. So in a way, actually, kind of tell us that perhaps visual aspects of processing is an effect of dyslexia and not really cognitive processes. But then again, I think we need to have more research into this to really have a confirmation on this. And we also found that the visual orthographic skills do play an important role in Chinese character reading. So chunking of visual features of Chinese characters could be a work of visual memory. And actually, we do also found that dyslexic students do have poorer morphological skills. So that means they kind of need to try to make sense of the semantic components and the visual components of it. So in the qualitative findings in the interview, I actually did coding. I actually used the in vivo coding to actually try to preserve the real voices of students when they actually try to explain to me about the Chinese characters. And then, of course, in the second round, I will try to make the relationships, the connections between the different categories of whatever they have shared to try to make sense of their thought processes in learning Chinese. So when asking them about how they feel, what they see in Chinese characters, some of them they tell me that it's a bunch of nonsense lines, or some of them they tell me that it's like a jigsaw puzzle, you need to do some detective work. So we have different extreme kind of responses. When you ask about how they feel, what do they feel when they are learning Chinese, and then some of them will tell me that, I really hate it, I don't understand it at all. And some will say, I love it, it's really very exciting. And then some people have very mixed feelings, and okay, sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. So with further probing, when I ask about so how will you try to cope with Chinese characters when you are learning it or you're unfamiliar with it? So sometimes they say that, I'll try to split it into parts and try to analyze it. Some of them, they say, I don't care, I don't know. Or I just try to draw whatever lines that I see, right? And then when I ask about, so how will you cope if you really need to learn it? And then some of them, they will say that, I try to force myself to memorize. I'll write many, many times. I go for Chinese tuition. And then sometimes I ask for help. And sometimes I say, I just copy from my friends. right? Okay, so we have a lot of varied answers in terms of their thoughts about Chinese characters. So when I asked them, so do you think your methods are successful? And some of them they say that, oh, it's not successful and I don't want to do it anymore. And some of them they'll say that, oh, sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. And some of them they're happy about it, sometimes they're not happy about it. All right, so trying to make sense of whatever they have shared with me, right? And I did notice that, no matter how, whether they have positive feelings or negative feelings, they have strategies or no strategies. Sometimes it actually boils back down to memory recall. Sometimes they say, if somehow I just remember I've learned it, but I just don't remember how to read it or how to write it. And then, of course, I mean, also most of our students say that, okay, when I try to press a bit further, they'll say that, okay, if I really cannot, I just give up. So it's like, it's either you really know it or you really don't. So it's a kind of mindset that a lot of our students actually have in terms of learning Chinese in Singapore. So in a way, actually, this grounded theory actually tell us, clearly illustrated about, how our children feel towards Chinese language and their varied level of orthographic awareness, their understanding of stroke patterns and the stroke productions and everything actually affects how they would, how would they would deal with the Chinese language itself. And of course, it's very much in line with a combination of the interactive lexical models that tells you how visual memory and phonological memory come into play in processing Chinese characters. So in conclusion, right, it seems that children who can who know a set of visual chunking skills would actually help them in terms of extracting visual features of Chinese characters, which also in turn builds their visual memory for Chinese characters as well. And also that children with poor chunking skills tend to indicate their insufficient awareness for the morphological, understanding the phonetic and the semantic components, and also even producing Chinese characters in the correct form and structure. So therefore, it's also believed that in order to help children with Chinese itself, we also need to help them with their visual memory work, which in turn, we also need to build up their visual orthographic awareness, the bianpang and the stroke patterns and everything, in terms of helping them in terms of reading, spelling, and also copying, writing Chinese characters in correct direction and also sequence. So with this, I've come to the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions, do feel free to speak with me. And this is actually the article that we have published in the APJDD, which is a portion of it together with my other colleagues, because we also have done a first year evaluation of our Chinese program. So with this, thank you very much for your time.